Great to see so many of you. Thank you so much for coming together and also for supporting my presidential campaign. I hope you found it exciting for Chinese Americans to think that we can actually aim higher in this country, that we don't necessarily need to assume that there are certain things that we can and can't do. So after I came off the trail in 2020, I still felt very saddened by the direction of American politics. I still felt like things were not going well. And then COVID came and it made things worse, particularly for Chinese Americans. And so I started setting about to figure out why I felt so negatively, so despondent. And I came to a conclusion that it turns out the American political system is set up not to solve problems, but instead to turn Americans against each other. And Chinese Americans and Asian Americans are going to end up caught in the middle and thrown under the bus in all likelihood, and we're kind of seeing and feeling that already. So what is the approval rating for US Congress as we're together today right now? Like, how many Americans like Congress?
Nobody.
Pretty split.
Yeah.
So he said between 20 and 30%, and that is correct. In October, it was 22%. It's between 20 and 28%. So 3 out of 4 Americans are not happy with whatever's happening or not happening at a Congress over the last period of years. What is the re-election rate for individual members of Congress?
90%.
你谁反应吧？
他在说，就是说现在这个上次总统大选以后，感谢大家支持，然后呢，但是过去几年他对美国政治发展的方向还是感到比较 sad， 就是比较悲哀吧，感觉这个倾向不好。然后他在问，就是 Andrew 在问，就是说美国这个国会议员的是国会议员吧，就是所以这个就当选官员的这个重新当选的率有多高？问大家知道不知道？有人说80、90，赖总觉得呢？
不了解。
So once again, he had it right. He's some kind of expert in government. He said 90%.
90. Wow.
The real re-election rate for individual members of Congress is 94%.
Wow.
Which is an astronomically high rate.
Yeah.
And so you all. So let's say that you work in business, which many of you do. Let's imagine if 3 out of 4 of your customers were unhappy, but then you changed absolutely nothing, or you changed next to nothing. That's what's been happening in the American political system, and the reason why the re-election rate is 94%, even though most Americans are upset, is that 90% of the congressional districts around the country are drawn to be either blue or red. They're drawn to be non-competitive in the general election. If you get to the general election, you have already won in 90% of these districts. So if you are, let's say, a Republican member of Congress, how can you lose your job? You can lose your job not by losing in the general election because it's drawn to be a red district.
Yeah.
The only way you can lose your job is if you get challenged in the primary and you lose in the primary by someone who's typically more extreme than you. So what they do is they say, hey, you sold out, you're too moderate, and we're like the true believers, and we challenge you and then we bring you down and win. This is what happened with the Tea Partiers, for example. The Tea Partiers rose up and they said, hey, we're going to come in. So if you're a member of Congress, the way you keep office is just by placating and pleasing the most extreme 10 or 12% of voters in your district and keep them happy, and then you win re-election.
Yeah.
So the incentives then are pushing members of Congress to the sides, and that's being made worse by the fact that media organizations in America separate Americans into ideological tribes and teams, where if you watch MSNBC, you're on the blue team, you watch Fox, you're on the red team. And then social media now is making everything much, much worse. It's making everything much more aggressive and sensational. Now, so this is what I realized in 2020 and I wrote a book about this called Forward, Notes on the Future of Our Democracy. I said, look, there's an incentives problem in the American political system where what you imagine has to happen, maybe what Janice has to do in real life, is you have to get 51% of people in your community to support you and then you win. But that's not actually the way the incentives are designed in the American political system. It's keep the most extreme 10 to 12% off of your back and then you win. And so at this point now, a Republican, well, I shouldn't say the party, whatever, a U.S. senator said to me that an issue is now worth more to legislators if it's unaddressed rather than if it's addressed.
Yeah.
In other words, if there's a problem, I can get you mad about it. I can raise money on it. Yeah, I can raise money on it. Like I can get votes on it. What happens if I actually try and solve the problem?
反映一下。
好，安主是说这个，就是说刚才不是问了这个重新当选率有多高吗？刚才有人猜80、90，他说实际上是94，所以大部分人都是能当选的，因为在各自的选区，不管是共和党、民主党，基本上你在选区都是你的选民了，就是说比较支持。如果这个国会议员他真正能失去选举的这个就是他选输的这个可能性比较大的，就是在初选里面他可能性比较大，因为初选里面可能会有一些人出来挑战你，大部分都是自己本党内的人，然后这些人呢他更激进，所以呢他的意思是说，一个人如果想要连任，他其实只要保持他选区内的10%到20%的那部分激进的人。让他们高兴就行了，他们没有人来挑战你，那么其他的人继续投票，你就可以继续当选。
I love this. This is the greatest.
Yeah, I summarize this very well.
这就是
He's so good. He's so good.
So good.
He is
就
good.
是未必这个体制有问题，体制。
对。
Right.
That's the
system
problem with the
ability.
system.
So,
System 有问题。
so you have these political incentives that now make it so that if I do solve the problem, I get attacked from within my own party. And one example of this was Marco Rubio, 10 years ago or so, came forward and said, hey, I'd like to reform immigration. And then a week later, he said, I take it back, I'm kidding. Or I was kidding. Because in that week, he got told by everyone in the Republican Party, shut up, Marco. If we do this, our own people are going to attack us, whereas if we don't do anything, then we can just keep getting people mad about it. And so you can use that frame for immigration, you can use that for climate change. Oh, sorry.
He agree whatever you say, but what you just say makes sense.
You can use it for a lot of different problems, which is why Americans feel more and more inflamed and upset, because the problems don't get solved. You don't get rewarded politically for solving a problem. And so people then get more and more polarized, which is at this point now almost half of Democrats regard Republicans as corrupt and a threat to the country, and almost half of Republicans view Democrats as corrupt and a threat to the country. And that polarization is getting worse and worse. And it's going to continue getting worse because that's the way the system is designed. So this is what I figured out in 2020. I said, wow, America has an incentives problem. And for those of us who run organizations, like if you have your giant team of how many people? Couple thousand. If you told those couple thousand, hey, if you if you just like get aggressive on cable news and like it'll make you famous and then you'll raise more money and like we're gonna draw a district around you where like people will like that. That's the behavior you get. So I looked at this and I said, okay, I get it now. There's like a wiring problem or a systems problem in the American political system, and I can go through the history of it. Where these two political parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, used to be much more similar. They were ideologically very similar, and I joke they used to be like vanilla versus French vanilla up until approximately 1964.
Yeah.
And then in 1964, the Democrats passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It flipped the South from being Democrat to Republican. And then in the 80s, they got rid of something called the Fairness Doctrine, where the press used to have both sides of the issue. They used to have to present that. They got rid of that.
Yeah.
And then in 1992, Fox and MSNBC were started. And then in 2004, Facebook was started. And over this period, then, the two parties started splitting up the country between urban and rural, in particular, and the coasts and the interior. I'll stop there because
那个他意思就是说现在，但是刚才就是这些官员他们能争取当选，然后给了选民很多这个承诺，但是呢，其实真正呢并没有去做这些事儿。就是谁要真正想要做事呢，可能 并没有从政治上它没有什么好处。就比如说他举了个例子，就是说当时有个叫 Mario， 他是共和党里面的一个新星，他很有影响。他说我要做改革移民啊，几年之内怎么样。后来共和党内的人就说你最好就不要说这个事儿，因为这个吃力不讨好的事儿。所以他意思就是说，这个政治上加上这个媒体现在也越来越分化。刚才讲了一些，就是美国左右的分化。民主党和共和党在64年以后就越来越分化。1964年以前，他说其实是很接近的。他就是说他说这个 vanilla 和 French vanilla 这个区别，这个我也不知道怎么翻译啊，就是说
法式香草，
对啊，
法式香草，
对，就是这个国光苹果和富士苹果的区别。
哎呀，
小兰哥，倍儿棒，点赞。
像美国之音啊，
可以。
你这个超强多了，破亿元的声音。
Fuji Apple and Honey Crispy as an example, but he didn't use the vanilla though.
So now you have. So now you have Americans who really are starting to mistrust each other and attack each other in different ways. So how the heck do you get out of this? How do you actually change it in real life? So what I figured out was that there are now 2 or 3 states that have made a change that actually really correct the incentives. And the main state that did this in 2020 was Alaska, where what Alaska did was they got rid of the party primaries. They said that anyone can vote for anyone, and then you can choose among all of the candidates using something called ranked choice voting. And what this does is this corrects it so that instead of having to listen to the 10 or 12% on one extreme or the other, I have to listen to the 51% of the general population. Now, you probably know who Sarah Palin is, who ran for vice president. So because Alaska changed their process, Sarah Palin lost to an Alaskan state legislator named Mary Peltola because more people thought Mary Peltola was reasonable, and Sarah Palin couldn't get over 50% of Alaskans to like her in this new process. So this Alaska change cost $6 million on a ballot initiative. And this idea was originated by a Harvard Business School graduate named Catherine Gale, who approached our political system like a business and said, okay, our business is running badly because the incentives actually aren't meant to reward good policy, they're meant to reward politics. And so how do you straighten that out? And so she said, look, get rid of the party primaries, choose your leaders via ranked choice voting. It rewards the moderates, it rewards people that get majority appeal. And then she actually led the Alaska ballot initiative to fix Alaska. So in 2020, I read this and I saw that she was right. And I said, we have to do what they did in Alaska in more and more states around the country to make it that moderate, reasonable officials win and then the extremists lose. So that's what I concluded in 2020. And then I thought, okay, well, how do you actually do that in real life? I'll stop there for a second.
这个安主说，就是说美国政治这个主要问题，就刚才讲到初选和大选分2步。那么就是有的地方呢，就把初选给取消了，像阿拉斯加就把初选取消，因为初选呢就是本党内选，是吧？本党内选呢，一般都是选这个选出来的人就是最激进的人，谁都比激进。比如说共产党里面谁更左谁更好吧？然后国民党里面或民进党里面谁越支持那个他就。所以他现在就是说，直接就去大选，比如说让这个2党一块儿选了以后呢，那选民在面临2党的时候呢，他就会选一个比较温和的中间的人，那这样子呢，他觉得比较好。
Didn't it just pass in Seattle?
It just passed in Seattle, ranked choice voting. So ranked choice.
Oh,
Yeah, that's that one.
1B.
Yeah. So ranked choice voting.
City, not county.
City.
City.
So ranked choice voting is a voting system where you can rank multiple candidates, and what this does is it makes it so that you can vote for anyone you want. It discourages negative campaigning because if I attack him, then we both look bad, and then Happy ends up looking better, and so it discourages negative.
You look better regardless.
It also helps women and minority candidates. Because if you just get one vote, then you just tend to vote for your group. But if you have multiple votes, then someone could vote for their person and then vote for let's say, another person who's moderate and reasonable second, and then that person ends up winning because they get more second place votes. So there are women. I genuinely think women benefit from ranked choice voting because women tend to be more reasonable, more consensus builders, less ideological.
But you know what? We get beat up more because we're working on policy and we make everyone unhappy.
Yeah, when you actually do things, because that's the way our political system works. But I do want to speak specifically to Chinese Americans and Asian Americans and our spot in this. So historically, Chinese Americans were about 50-50 Democrat Republican. It's different here in Washington because so 3/4 of the states are either blue or red. Washington is a blue state. And so most people tend to get involved with that party because, like being in the minority party in a one-party state means you influence nothing. But historically, nationwide, Chinese Americans and Asian Americans.
那个我想给每个万要一下。
慢点等 Andrew 说完。
We're generally speaking 50% Democrat, 50% Republican, because many Chinese Americans were business owners and they wanted low taxes, and Republicans tended to want lower taxes. So 50% of Chinese Americans were like, I like the Republicans, and then 50% said I like the Democrats. Now, over the last 10 or 12 years, that has shifted, where now Asian Americans and Chinese Americans are 60 to 65% Democrat, 35-40% Republican. And the reason for that is that the Republican Party has become more nasty and sort of xenophobic and hostile. And so more Chinese Americans and Asian Americans were like, hey, I didn't sign up for this. I signed up for the tax thing. So let me head over to the Democrats. The problem is that Democrats don't actually prioritize Chinese Americans or Asian Americans.
True.
And right now, if there's maybe one thing that both parties agree on, it's competing on who can be tougher on China. And so because of that, you wind up with ratcheting tensions between the U.S. and China to a Cold War or worse. And again, one of the groups that's going to get thrown under the bus in that scenario is Chinese Americans, because most Americans don't distinguish that much between Chinese Americans, and Asian Americans. And we are naturally, if you think about this logically for a second, Asian Americans are 6.5% of the American population. If you have a two-party system, we will never be a top priority in this two-party system because we're an afterthought in both. And so right now we're stuck. A lot of us feel we have to be Democrats because the Republican Party doesn't seem welcoming, but again, the Democratic Party is not necessarily prioritizing us, and by the numbers, they don't have to. They don't feel they have to. So these are all the things, again, I figured out in 2020, and I said, what can we do to get out of this in real life? So in real life, what we have to do is do what they did in Alaska in as many states as we can around the country. And so I started the Forward Party last year to help create this new lane, this new alternative. We're now already the third biggest political party in the country by resources after 1 year. There are a lot of people joining us that are moderate Republicans who don't like this version of the Republican Party. A lot of business types who just want things to work better and they know that our political system's not working. But my pitch to Chinese Americans is to say, look, we can actually take advantage of the fact that there aren't that many of us, but the system is so dumb and so broken that it does not take that many of us to actually influence everything and influence the whole thing.
Sure.
What do I mean? In 2020, the presidential election was decided by about 70,000 votes in 4 states: Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, and Georgia. The same will be true in 2024, where the difference between the two parties, 99% of votes do not count in the system. They don't matter, because you're going to vote in Washington State, you can vote whoever you want. The Democrat's going to win this state and going to get all the electoral votes. You go to Missouri, it's the opposite. There are only going to be 4, maximum 6 states that decide this election. Now, it turns out that Asian Americans are 9.1% of the population in Nevada, 4.4% of the population in Georgia, 3% in the other swing states, in states that will be decided by 1% or less. So if Chinese Americans and Asian Americans were to get together and say, we are going to join a coalition of voters in these 4 states that will support whichever major party tries to turn down the polarization by adopting ranked choice voting and nonpartisan primaries. And if you wanted to, you could make an ask specific to Chinese Americans and Asian Americans. You could ask for a cabinet secretary, a museum, like better treatment.
You mean things we've been asking for, right?
Exactly.
We don't have the museum. We don't have truly a cabinet member right now.
No, you don't. I was with another group, and they said a Supreme Court justice, and I said sure. So the funny thing is, this system is so stupid that you literally can control everything with only a couple 100,000 voters in 4 states.
Yeah.
And if you were to rally the Chinese Americans and the Asian Americans, that actually already is more than the number you need in those 4 states, just by the math. Now, most Chinese Americans and Asian Americans don't understand the American political system. They think like, hey, and I was with a group of Chinese American donors who were very frustrated because most of their candidates lost in this past cycle. Janice being an exception and whatnot, and others.
Sam will be an exception too. We all have a winner sitting here.
We'll see. Next year we're both running.
That's right.
Oh
so,
yeah.
So there are. So this new system of nonpartisan primaries and ranked choice voting will advantage Asian Americans in a couple of ways. One, it naturally rewards non-ideological, get stuff done, practical candidates, which I suggest most Chinese Americans and Asian Americans naturally, like you two, fall into that camp.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that if you have this 2-party system, then our numbers don't make as much of a difference. But if you have this, you have to build a majority coalition, then our numbers actually can make the difference between victory and defeat much more often. If you're not stuck wedged between one party and the other. And the biggest example of this nationwide would be if we rally folks and organize them and actually make ourselves the pivotal group in the 4 swing states. I said a lot. I'm going to.
Yeah, I'm just going to translate the call.
The core.
对啊，那安主说就是说这个亚洲人在美国是6%的总人口，所以在大选中间呢，其实没有什么太大的影响力。如果分成2党的话，那一边50%，那就一边也就3%。但是呢，他说这个本来也不重要，因为美国90%左右的州都是差不多都是已经定好了。你在华盛顿州反正是个蓝州，你怎么投最后都是全都给蓝州，就是民主党全都拿走。但是差不多全美国有6个州是现在叫 swing state， 就是摇摆州了。就是这个决定它到底是民主党还是共和党呢？其实就差不多1%左右的票数。但是在这些州中间呢，亚裔的这个力量就是其实都是。它在人口的总数呢是超过1%的，4%啊到6%啊。如果亚裔在这些州能够联合起来，跨越党派形成一个联盟来投票，会左右这些州的最后投给谁，然后这6个摇摆州投给谁，最后能左右整个美国，最后是哪个州哪个党这个入主国会和白宫，就是这个意思。
我说2句啊，这个你翻译啊。
乐乐翻译吧。
美国的体制存在着优点也很都是，这个体制能维持200多年，说明有它的基础，应该是有利有弊。但是美国现在就白宫的人，谢海培也是他的朋友，就是公认美国现在是滑坡，美国走向衰落，也可能在10年、20年。就是现在他这个前进党要解决什么问题？前进党的宗旨是什么？美国存在的问题大家有目共睹，就是前进党要解决什么问题？我的建议啊，就是前进党应该把人民的利益放在第一位，人民的健康放在第一位。第二个，促进美国团结和平，促进世界和平。第3才是发展， 就是才能解决美国的问题。你给他翻。
Yeah, Mr. Lai was saying that the U.S. has about 200 some history and the system seems to be running well, which means the system is designed or was designed fine. But recently, that he felt that the U.S. is kind of going down, and something needed to be done. And he was wondering, you and your party, what's the main, the policy or not ideology, but basically, what's your thought about putting this country back to track? And he has three suggestions. One is to put people's interest first.
Yes.
And second is to promote world peace and health. And the third, I forgot.
then development. Then development. 然后就发展。
After that, the first two, then the development of the country.
Yeah. So the core problem right now is that if you're in office nationally, locally, you probably this is different, but nationally, you don't necessarily need to deliver for people or communities in order to win your race again. I mean, just by the numbers, like 94% win rate, regardless. And so you have two sides that are now just arguing with each other and are more ideological than they are fact-based. So our goal to turn everything around would be just to have a dashboard in Congress with a series of measurements and numbers saying, look, like these are the real numbers, and when you show up, you can just identify which of these numbers you want to work on and improve and hold yourself accountable to those. We're not even going to tell you which ones. You just have to choose from among these. And then you can have people competing on what's actually moving the results in a better direction. And you have a third party in Congress that is in the middle that can actually work with either side to get something done. Because right now, if I'm a Republican, all I have to do is wait, and then the Democrats will eventually, do something that people don't like, or there'll be inflation, and maybe they can't do anything about it, and then we'll win. And then if you're a Democrat now, you'll be like, well, like 2 or 4 years from now, the Republicans will do something that people don't like and will win. But during that time, the actual results for people and families and communities will be going down, which is what he's feeling. Because right now, the United States of America is 31st in the world in public education, in infant mortality, in clean air and water, in life expectancy, and it's all going down. Yeah. And neither party actually needs to worry about making those things better, because that's not the nature of the system anymore. So if you can make it so that this system it serves the people's interests, and then if you don't serve the people's interests, you get voted out, and you don't have a permanent tenure position, which they essentially do now in the current system, then you can change everything if you change the incentives.
Well, because the reality is what's happening is at the city level, all we really want from Congress is send money, don't tell us what to do, because you're not solving any problems. So we are the repository of failed policies at the federal level, and then the cities have to figure out how to solve the problem. Then people are always unhappy with us because they see us at the grocery store.
I feel your pain, Janice. Like I genuinely do.
It's getting worse. It's getting worse.
杨先生说，这个就是他们党因为作为这个就是在国会扮演一个第三党的角色，把这个需要解决的问题把它列出来，放在一个就像放在一个这个公示牌一样的，他也不去告诉两个大的党去做什么，让他们自己挑，但是不断的把这些问题列出来，让他们来看到我们国家现在面临的问题，然后不断的解决，没有解决的问题一直就放在那儿，它起这么一个作用，就是说一个提醒两大党这个需要解决什么问题，是这么个意思。然后 Janice 的意思呢是说。在市政府或者市议会这个党级别呢， 他们好像是现在只是作为一个联邦，就是他们希望做的就是说让联邦政府要联邦政府拨款拨过来，但是呢，并不希望联邦政府来叫他们在你这个钱怎么花，你怎么用啊？因为这个联邦政府经常把事情搞砸。
I feel your pain.
美国这个体制啊，有几百年历史，要改变美国这个体制，改变美国这个存在的问题也很难，也很不容易。
是，Mr. Lai, I think it's very difficult to change things because the system has been running for like over 200 years. It's kind of it's very difficult.
So he's correct.
Yeah.
But now 50% of Americans don't like either party. They say they're independents. And did you explain the 4 swing state 1%?
Yeah. You said 6 swing or 4.
So you can either say 4 or 6. So I'll tell you 4
I
states.
told him about 6.
So 4 of them are decided by 1% or less.
Right, exactly.
And then Michigan and Pennsylvania are about 2%. So they'll be defined as swing states probably. But if you look at the 4, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, Wisconsin. And 2 of those states have high Asian concentrations, Nevada and Georgia.
I did explain that.
Yeah. So he's right that it's
actually 1 or 2% decided the whole thing, but the Asian population is bigger than 1 or 2%. You mentioned like 3, 4, 5. Or
it's 9% in Nevada.
Nevada. Las Vegas is in Nevada.
Yes. So you all know people. You get to.
They like to gamble.
这个问题我都不好意思翻译。
But
I've never been there.
Like you are correct. It's very difficult, but it's doable if you are smart and opportunistic.
来总杨先生说，你那个说是对的，就是这个制度很难改，这个200多年。但是呢，如果大家都很聪明呢，就是也是可以改的，也可以有，因为有50%的美国人现在就是说，既不喜欢民主党，也不喜欢共和党，所以这就是这里面还是有很多机会。
Yeah. So what's interesting is, in my opinion, so my parents came to the U.S. For better opportunities for me and my brother and the family. But things are now reversing, where this country is going downhill, as Dr. Lai said, and it's going to take, in my opinion, the Chinese American community to help fix the country. Because the country is just going to get worse and worse and dumber and clasher, and then Chinese Americans are going to look up saying like, oh my gosh, like this is getting more and more dangerous for me and mine, and so it's up to us to try and fix the system. And there are other people that also want to fix the system. So the Forward Party, to date, has raised something like $8 million. And so we're already working with various things to try and make it happen. We have chapters in every state. But I would love for the Chinese American community to become a core part of this coalition. It's very exciting.
Yay!
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Wish you successful.
Thank you. I'm so glad you understand it so deeply.